Greetings, fellow men. Servus Männer. It's Red Pill Germany again. So I took a little bit of time off from making videos. I had to recover a little bit and I had a lot of stress at work. But now I thought I make another video. So as Germany is celebrating this year 500 years of Reformation, even me as some kind of a cultural Catholic, I think I have to comment on Martin Luther. Now he was truly a monk going his own way. Now Martin Luther was born in the city of Eisleben in Saxony, Eastern Germany in 1483. So he was a really smart guy and he studied at Erfurt University among other places, and he joined the Order of St. Augustine. He studied the 7 arts and became a theologist. Now you have to know that at this time the Pope in Rome wanted to build a very big cathedral, St. Peter's Cathedral. And for that purpose he needed a lot of money. So at that time it became popular to sell indulgences, which basically means that you can pay the church some money and they use it for building the cathedral, and therefore they say that your sins are forgiven. And Martin Luther took offense with that practice, really. So he said that the church cannot just forgive people's sins for a charge of money. And it was in October 1517, actually, 500 years ago, when he wrote to the Bishop of Mainz in order to complain about this practice. So in this letter he enclosed his famous 95 theses that were labeled Disputation of Martin Luther on the Power and Efficacy of Indulgences. Now it is a popular legend, or a myth actually, that he nailed these theses to a church door. That is not really true, I guess, but nevertheless. So Martin Luther at this time was some kind of a shit poster, maybe, you know. So if he were alive today, he would probably be a new media guy or a YouTuber with very polarizing opinions, basically, and with strong arguments. And later in his life, he would actually write a lot of texts on theology and morality, even politics, and he used the new media. And at that time, the new media was, of course, the book press that was invented in Germany around that time. So, of course, his strong opinion on the sale of indulgences was a provocation to the church, and he was questioned and found guilty of heresy. So, in the end, it went back and forth. He was condemned by the Holy Roman Emperor and also excommunicated by the Pope in Rome. So he was basically wanted for heresy by everyone. And it were local German lords basically who helped him to escape and who sheltered him in their castle, where he could write and study. And he actually was the guy who translated the New Testament and later on the whole Bible actually into German. And until that time the Bible only existed in the Latin version, or in maybe some books in the Greek originals or something. But this translation of the Bible by Martin Luther, the Luther Bible, actually became the standard of what written German would be like. He just wrote it like he thought he would speak. You know, there was no at that time there was no standard rule of orthography in Germany yet. But the Luther Bible became really influential for the German language, and it cannot really be underestimated in its impact. So he was not only a big reformer, but he actually left the order of St. Augustine, of course, and he actually married. He married the former nun Katharina von Bora, and he had many children with her. And the offspring, his descendants basically, are still until this day organized in a club, and their symbol is the rose of Martin Luther. Now there are still over 5,000 people who are descendants of Martin Luther who are organized in this club, and there should be many more actually who we don't know about basically. So I find stories like these quite remarkable actually. There is a guy who is a monk basically, which at that time and still today, when you follow the rules of monastic life, like the rules of Saint Benedict, for example, it means complete obedience to the church and to the abbot and the prior, the monastery, your brothers, no worldly possessions basically, and a very simple life of obedience, prayer, and work. And this he didn't want anymore, and he basically wanted to have a family and leave the church. And so he had a bunch of children and a wife, the Pope and the Emperor wanting him dead basically. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Of course, today we find ourselves in the opposite situation. When you have wife and children and some people wanna do you harm or are actually against you, you are basically out of luck. You will be hunted down, you end up in jail, or your family will turn against you. Back then, the opposite was true. Nowadays, we have people referring to themselves as monks, MGTOW monks, or the monks of MGTOW, and they are actually the ones who can truly go their own way, who can keep what they earn, who can use their time according to what interests them, who can work as much or as little as possible, who have all the freedoms in the world. And back then, being a monk actually meant, like what a Christian monk would still mean today, or a Buddhist monk for that matter, that unless you're a hermit, but even then you still owe allegiance and obedience to your order, but mostly you would live in a monastic community with other monks, and then it is all about obedience, discipline, and following the rules, and where every minute of your day is kind of scheduled and it's very strict. And it's not really going your own way, it's actually the opposite of going your own way. You surrender your liberties and your free will to God or the church or the monastic order. So nowadays, completely different situation. And this is what I like about Turd Flinging Monkey's videos so much, for example. He doesn't look only at foreign countries as other YouTubers do, and he's not the only one, but many others also, like Stardust, they also look into the past. As I said, the past is a foreign country, and this quote is not by me, of course, it is by LP Hartley as far as I know, but I like this quote. It means really that the past is, especially 500 years ago, is nothing like our times today, and civilizations are, of course, going up and down. There are cycles, or there are periodic contributions to the course of civilizations and history. And as we know from the coffee house culture in Britain, or from men, bachelors in the late Roman Empire who were not so crazy about getting married, we know about the prohibition in the US, for example. All those things that tell us that these crazy things that we experience nowadays, they have been there before in a different context, at a different time, but basically it has already been the same things at a couple of points or times in history already. But in the time of Martin Luther in Germany, you could very well go your own way being married. That did not keep you from realizing your dreams, like Johann Sebastian Bach, for example, who was much later, but still, lots of kids, and he was fully self-actualized. Then Martin Luther, to stay with this example, I mean, he fought an ideological war against the greatest powers, against the emperor and the pope, and he was just producing a lot of texts, like posting videos nowadays. Basically, he was writing these theses and these theological and political texts, and with the book press, they were multiplying all over the Reich in no time at all. It went viral, one could say. He was also very outspoken about the threat of the Ottoman Turks, for example. In the beginning, he saw them as the scourge of Europe for the sinful behavior, of us. And a lot of these elements can be seen in today's discourse, where people say that radical Muslims are flooding into Europe because we are decadent. It's not their fault, basically, or they're just the scourge of Europe, but the sickness comes from within, basically. But later on, Martin Luther, when he gathered more facts and evidence, he actually became very outspoken, not for a new crusade. He wanted to keep religion and government separate, but he thought that it would be the duty of the worldly powers of Europe to defend the people of Europe and to strike back against the Muslim aggression. If you look at the events that happened during his lifetime from the late 15th to the middle of the 16th century, you can appreciate what kind of political or military situation it had been at that time on the Balkan or between the Middle East and Europe. So he found very clear words in this affair, actually. He's also a very controversial figure these days because, of course, the Lutheran Church of Germany is very proud of their great reformer, Martin Luther. But the things that he said about the Jews and their contributions to history and the way they act behind the scenes, as he thought, is of course very controversial these days, and the Lutheran churches are of course apologizing all the time for what Martin Luther said. And it's almost funny to watch how they want to condemn him for his anti-Jewish stance he took, but at the same time they want to celebrate their great reformer. So I think if you're interested in this topic, I would suggest that you just read about the history of the Reformation and the life of Martin Luther, because the history of the Church and the Holy Roman Empire are so intertwined that they can hardly be seen as separate at all. And it is highly interesting, I think, to appreciate the complexity of medieval European politics when you see the different centers of power in Rome and across the Alps, in the north, and the interplay between the church, the local feudal lords, and the central authority, the emperor, actually, who was elected, by the way, by the prince electors. So he needed the alliances with the different feudal lords. And as I was reading about Martin Luther again recently, I just noticed that, wow, this guy was a monk, and then he basically left his monastery, he left his order behind, and he became a married man and the father of many children. But I would say he went his own way. So that just goes to show how different this time was back then, how different the social environment was, how different the circumstances, the legal or social pressures on people were that held these families together. And I think a woman and a mother would have had no motivation whatsoever to leave her family and her husband behind back then, because the children would have stayed with the father anyway, and she would have lost basically her man, her income, her protector, her provider. Without a man, a woman wasn't really able to survive, unless she went to a monastery, of course. But this is exactly where Katharina von Bora was running away from. So I guess I bored all the Germans with this talk about something that they are familiar with anyway, but maybe people outside of Germany are not too familiar with Martin Luther, and maybe it makes for an interesting read. Have a great day. Servus, Kameraden.